The salt air of the Adriatic had a way of blurring boundaries, but for Obinna and Arina, the lines drawn by tradition were initially much sharper than the horizon. An unexpected intersection. Obinna had arrived in Trieste from Lagos with a scholarship and a relentless work ethic. By his final year at the University of Trieste, he was a fixture in the law library, a tall, composed presence often seen buried under stacks of international maritime codes. Arina, a local Tristina with a laugh that could cut through the thickest winter fog, met him not in a romantic piazza, but in the sterile, fluorescent halls of the city hospital. Obinna had been brought in with a minor concussion after a clumsy collision during a pickup football match. "You should really keep your eyes on the ball, avocado," she teased while checking his vitals. "I find the architecture of this city far more distracting than the ball," Obinna countered, his voice smooth and accented. That brief exchange sparked a year of secret espresso dates at Café degli Specchi and long walks along the Barcola seafront. To Obinna, Arina was the warmth of the Italian sun. To Arina, Obinna was a pillar of integrity and ambition she hadn't found elsewhere. The wall of tradition. When Obinna graduated at the top of his class, he wanted to celebrate by finally meeting Arina's family. Arina, knowing her parents, was hesitant. Her father, Pietro, was a retired dockworker with rigid views, and her mother, Elena, believed her daughter should marry a local boy from their own parish. The dinner at their home in San Giacomo was fraught with a silence so heavy it felt physical. The rejection. Pietro refused to look Obinna in the eye, focusing instead on his polenta. Elena was polite but distant, her questions pointedly focused on when Obinna planned to return home. The conflict. When Obinna formally expressed his intentions to marry Arina, Pietro stood up. "We are people of tradition," he said gruffly. "A life so different from ours, it cannot work. You are a guest in this city, nothing more." Arina didn't back down. "He isn't a guest in my heart, Papa. And he's a better man than any local boy I've ever met." The turning point. The months that followed were cold. Arina stayed in close contact with her parents, but the tension remained until a local legal crisis hit the neighborhood. A developer was attempting to illegally evict several elderly residents, including Pietro's lifelong friends, to build luxury apartments. Pietro was despondent, unable to navigate the complex Italian bureaucracy. Without being asked, Obinna spent his nights after work at a local firm drafting pro bono motions. He represented the neighborhood association in court, using his Trieste-honed legal mind to dismantle the developer's claims. When the news broke that the residents could stay, Pietro found Obinna sitting on a bench by the Canal Grande. "You did this for us," Pietro said, sitting down heavily beside him. "Why? After how I treated you?" "Because Arina loves this neighborhood," Obinna replied simply. "And because a lawyer's job is to protect his family. A union of two worlds." The wedding was held at the Cathedral of San Giusto, overlooking the city. It was a vibrant collision of cultures. The style. Arina wore a classic white lace gown, but her bouquet was wrapped in a strip of vibrant green and gold Aso oak fabric. Obinna was dapper in a tailored Italian suit for the ceremony, later changing into traditional Nigerian attire for the reception. The feast. The menu featured a daring but delicious mix of jollof rice and gnocchetti de pan. The toast. The highlight of the evening was Pietro, standing with a glass of Prosecco, stumbling through a few sentences of Yoruba he had spent weeks practicing. As they danced to a mix of Afrobeat and Italian swing, the city of Trieste watched on, a place that had once been a port of departure for Obinna, but had finally, irrevocably, become his home. Both Italian and Nigerian cultures were respectively observed where necessary in the details of that reception. There is something so visually and sensorially rich about blending Nigerian and Italian wedding traditions, from the money spraying on the dance floor to the delicate trays of confetti and cannoli. The fusion reception at Villa Rivoltella. The reception held at the historic Villa Rivoltella was a masterclass in cultural harmony. The decor. The tables were draped in ivory linen, but the centerpieces were a bold mix of Mediterranean olive branches and tropical proteas. Each guest's place setting featured a small bottle of local Tergest olive oil paired with a hand-woven Nigerian fan. The entrance. Arina and Obinna made their grand entrance twice. First, in their ceremony attire to the sound of a string quartet playing Vivaldi. The second entrance, however, shook the villa walls. they emerged in matching oak outfits in a regal shade of teal and gold. Obinna wore a sharp agbada, while Arina stunned in a bubba and a perfectly wrapped gel head tie that the Nigerian aunties had spent an hour perfecting for her. The culinary bridge. Appetizers, arancini stuffed with spicy jollof rice. Main course. A choice of traditional bolito misto or a refined aguzzi soup with pounded yam, served with the elegance of a five-star Italian bistro. The dance floor. The money spraying tradition, where guests pin or throw notes on the couple to symbolize future prosperity, was a shock to Arina's Italian relatives at first. But after Pietro, Arina's father, saw the joy it brought, he was the first one up with a stack of euro notes, laughing as he showered his new son-in-law. Their first year. A quiet Tuesday in Trieste. Life after the honeymoon settled into a rhythmic, Triestine Lagos hybrid. On a rainy Tuesday in November, the Bora wind was howling through the streets. Obinna was at the kitchen table, his laptop glowing with maritime law contracts, while Arina had just returned from a long shift at the hospital. "The wind is trying to take the roof off today," Obinna remarked, looking up as Arina hung her damp coat. "That's just the Bora welcoming you home, amore," she replied, kissing his forehead. She noticed a pot on the stove. Obinna had been learning to make her grandmother's minestra de bissi pea soup, but the kitchen smelled distinctly of ginger and Scotch bonnet peppers. "I added a little heat," he admitted with a grin. "For the cold." They sat together, eating the spicy Italian soup while looking out at the gray Adriatic. They were no longer the law student and the nurse, nor were they symbols of a cultural bridge. They were simply a husband and wife, building a life in a city that had finally learned to claim them both. At some point after their wedding, Arina requested to go to Nigeria to see her husband's family. That trip would be the ultimate reverse of their experience in Trieste, shifting from the quiet, windy streets of the Adriatic to the humid, high-energy pulse of Lagos. The arrival at Murtala Muhammad International. The moment Arina stepped off the plane, the heat hit her like a physical embrace, thick, sweet, and smelling of salt and diesel. Obinna watched her nervously, but Arina, ever the adaptable nurse, simply tied her hair back and grinned. "It's louder than the Bora," she shouted over the terminal's roar. The introduction. In Surulere, Obinna's family home was a hive of activity. His mother, Mrs. Okachukwu, had been cooking for 2 days. When they pulled up, the street seemed to erupt. The matriarch's welcome. Obinna's mother didn't just shake Arina's hand, she pulled her into a rhythmic hug, chanting blessings in Igbo. She looked Arina up and down, noting her sturdy build. "A nurse, good. You have strong hands for work and a kind face for my son." The fashion test. Before the first hour was up, Arina was whisked away by Obinna's sisters. They emerged an hour later with Arina dressed in a vibrant, custom-tailored lace iro and bubba. When she walked into the parlor, the room fell silent for a second before his uncles began clapping. The culinary challenge. Then came the pepper. Arina pridefully claimed she could handle spicy because of the pepperoncino back home. One spoonful of the authentic, home-cooked fisherman's soup proved her wrong. Her eyes watered, and she reached desperately for water, much to the roaring laughter of the cousins. A quiet moment on the balcony. Late that night, away from the drums and the dozens of aunties who had dropped by to inspect the Italian bride, Obinna and Arina stood on the small balcony overlooking the Lagos skyline. "Are you overwhelmed?" Obinna asked, leaning against the railing. "It's a lot," Arina admitted, leaning her head on his shoulder. "In Trieste, we had to fight for them to see us. Here, it's like they've already woven me into the fabric of the family. I've never been called daughter by so many strangers in one day." Obinna took her hand. "My mother says you have the heart of a Lagosian, because you didn't complain about the humidity once. Tell her I'm just happy the soup didn't actually kill me," she joked. The legacy of 2 cities. The story of Obinna and Arina didn't end with a wedding or a single trip. It became a lifelong practice of translation, translating the law, translating flavors, and translating love. They eventually settled in a home in Trieste where the scent of rosemary from the garden often mingled with the aroma of fried plantains. They proved that while geography might define where you start, it's the person walking beside you who defines where you're going. I would love to. There is something profoundly beautiful about the third culture, Children create a world where two distinct histories merge into a single, lived reality. The epilogue. A house of two sons. 10 years later, the apartment in Trieste's Città Vecchia was a loud, chaotic, and fragrant map of two continents. Obinna, now a respected maritime lawyer, and Arina, a head nurse, found their greatest challenge and joy in raising their two children, Luca Chitti and Sofia Amaka. A symphony of languages, the children grew up in a linguistic kaleidoscope. At the breakfast table, a typical morning sounded like a seamless weave. "Papa, where are my scarp?" Luca would shout in Italian. "Check the hallway, NNAM," Obinna would answer in Igbo. "And don't forget your snack, O Dabo." Arina would chime in, her Italian accent softening the Yoruba phrases she had proudly mastered. The Sunday ritual. Sundays became the anchor of their fusion identity. The morning usually began with a walk to the Piazza Unita d'Italia, where the children chased pigeons under the watchful eye of Nonno Pietro. The man who had once sat in stony silence at the prospect of this union was now the one teaching Luca how to bait a fishing line in the Adriatic and telling him stories of the old Trieste docks. In the afternoons, the kitchen became a diplomatic zone. The menu. Arina's mother, Elena, would arrive with frika, a local cheese and potato dish, only to find Mrs. Okachukwu, visiting from Lagos, already searing meat for a pot of jollof. The harmony. Instead of clashing, the two grandmothers developed a wordless communication based on the universal language of too much salt, or not enough heat. They sat together on the balcony, one sipping espresso and the other peeling yams, watching the sunset over the Gulf of Trieste. The Bora and the Harmattan. The children's bedrooms were a gallery of their dual soul. Beside a model of a Venetian gondola sat a hand-carved wooden drum from Enugu. For their birthdays, they wore Italian silk waistcoats over Nigerian Sokoto trousers. Obinna and Arina often stood in the doorway, watching their children navigate this blended world with an ease they themselves had fought so hard to achieve. They realized that Luca and Sofia didn't see two different worlds, they saw one big, colorful home. The lines that once seemed so sharp on that first night in San Giacomo had finally faded, replaced by the vibrant, messy, and indestructible tapestry of a family that chose love over boundaries.